At about 5:24 this morning, do you know what arrived? Summer. Spring, we're not going back. Didn't you get the celebration memo last night? Spring is over. Summer is here. This is good. Doesn't it look like summer out? Well, maybe not. Okay. This week, aside from the weather, but summer is a time for travel, isn't it? Summer is a time to get out of Dodge. Summer's a time to pack things up and hit the road. Anyone with me? No? No one? Sometimes summer is the time for many of you, that depending, especially teachers, right? Summer vacation, isn't that wonderful? And you get to get out of town for a little while. Some of you might be going down to Browns Flat, down to Beulah. Maybe I'll see some of you there. Graham and Ann, anyone? I got to spend some time there, got to see Pastor Tim, and it's always good to get away and do that. I've shared with some of you before that this has only happened once because I'm very particular about what I pack and what I don't pack. And it's hard. If you're going on an international flight, there are some regulations, so you have to think carefully about what's with you. And so if I'm flying, I have things ready to either read or view. I have noise-canceling headphones, all of that. And I make sure to kind of streamline things so that it'll fit in the overhead compartment. And then I make sure that if I need to bring things back, I have a suitcase ready for that. I make sure everything's ready. But one time we were taking a trip just up the coast, and Kelsey and I, we packed and we were getting away, and we were staying at a cottage, and we were going to, be kind of looking out at the water and maybe getting some time to swim and take the dog out. And I came in after walking the beach, and I wanted to change. And I said to Kelsey, "Where are my shirts?" And she said, "What shirts?" And I thought she was just pranking me. I thought this was pretty good. Yeah, no, seriously though, but where are my shirts? Like all of them. And she's like, I didn't touch your shirts. I didn't pack your shirts. You're responsible for your own things, which I am a grown man. Sometimes I just forget about those things. So I actually only had the shirt I was wearing, and that was neat. And so I'll never do that again. But there was one time where I unpacked and realized, you have to pack a thing to unpack it. I don't know if that's like maybe too advanced for us this morning. I'll go slower. But that was an embarrassing moment for me that I'm just pleased to share with you at my own expense. But the series we're in this summer, we've done Unpack in a few different ways before, but this summer is unique, is that we're doing it this way, unpacking the parables of Jesus. There's so many, and parables are often described as these simple stories that have a profound truth. It's profound because sometimes it is basic kind of materials. Jesus could have literally been looking around and see this and then have kind of a real illustration, yet there are depths to it that people need to understand. Actually, the gospel writer of Matthew tells us that Jesus never spoke without using parables. This was an important part of his teaching, and today we're looking at one that many of us would refer to as the prodigal son. It is a famous one for sure. Just a little context before we dive in. The first couple verses are some of the fewest that have black letters before we get into the red letters of Jesus' teaching. And the context is really simple. There's two groups of people that are present. There's the people who knew they were bad, and then there's the people who thought they were good. And so there's kind of a split in the audience. But the religious leaders were complaining, and verse 2 is clear about saying why, is that Jesus was associating with such sinful people. Can you imagine? And he was even eating with them. And so this was a big deal for the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law. And so they're frustrated with him. And so Jesus responds not with one, not with two, but actually three parables. He starts with the lost sheep, and then he moves to the lost coin. But then there's a third story, and as I mentioned, we call this the prodigal son because most people think that it's about one lost son. There's actually two. And so maybe you've heard this 2,000 times before. Maybe you haven't heard it yet. But for anywhere that we're kind of fitting today, including myself, I hope that we can see this from kind of a fresh perspective. We don't just take assumptions that, I already know that. Our flower girl, when we got married, we would tell her something like, hey, did you hear? Like, we're getting married. She's like, I already knew that. And so sometimes we can come in with the attitude, I already know this. And yeah, we might know this story, but I think there's something that the Spirit wants us to unpack today, and that is the series we're in. So we're not going to read the first parable. We're not going to read the second. We're diving into this third one, and in my Bible, it's called the parable of the lost son. But again, there are two. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had, there it is, 2 sons. It's right there in the beginning. How did we miss it? The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. And so his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, the younger son packed all his belongings. I hope he packed his shirts. And he moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. And so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Wouldn't it be great if the story ended right there? Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf, and we're celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you, never once refused to do a single thing you told me to, and in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes. You celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and he has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. The story is really divided into 2 acts, and sometimes we focus just on the first one. And today we're going to look at both and hopefully see the relevance and why this is so important. It's apparent that the first act is truly about that younger son of the father. But then Act 2, it changes, and all of a sudden it's the older brother and his encounter with the father. And so as we dive into the younger son, that first act, we're going to see kind of a theme. And in pastoral form, there's a lot of alliteration. For those that are taking notes, it was so good for me the last few weeks to be sitting in the front row, and I was taking copious amounts of notes, something that I notice either in Bible study or when I'm preparing for a message just like this. Every now and then, it just seems like certain words with alliteration come out, and so you're going to see a theme with our words, and so bonus points to the one who can show your work after and show me, and maybe I'll have a treat for you. As if it was kids' church, right? We could do that. Maybe if you get your memory verse, I'll give you something good and we'll celebrate. The first of these R words is rebellion. It's kind of an act of rebellion, and yes, we're looking through this story with modern eyes, but for the original audience, the original listeners on both sides, they would have thought that many things in the story were unusual, were unexpected, and Jesus tells the story, and because many of us have heard it for so long, it just seems somewhat normal, somewhat standard. But for a son like this, and even the younger son, to ask for the inheritance before his father was dead is to say to him, I wish you were. And so this is unusual that he would ask, and then it's unusual that the father would respond in such a way. This younger son wants the father's stuff. It doesn't appear like he wants the father. And he leaves home. He packs his bags. And there's also this running theme continuing with alliteration that the younger son here, he runs away from home. Have you ever been there? Maybe as a kid, you packed a small bag with some Ritz crackers and headed off, 5 minutes down the road, thought you were on a good track. Many of the black and white movies that some of us watched when we were younger, we see someone trying to get on the train and take off. But here, this guy actually does go off to a somewhat distant land. He runs away from home, and then he runs out of money, and he runs right into famine. And so he didn't expect this, but here he is, and then he's really in ruin. He's lost, he's broken, he's desperate. Finally, he comes to his senses. We might use the word remorse. He feels like he's done something wrong. He rehearses, to add to the alliteration, he rehearses a speech to his father. Have you ever done that? You're preparing to give news to your parents, maybe bad news, maybe something happened, maybe you did something you shouldn't have, and you're trying to figure out how to just sweeten it just a little bit. He rehearses a speech, and what is the son expecting? I think most would answer, well, he's expecting forgiveness, but that's not actually true. That's not quite right. Here, he's actually expecting a job. He thinks that's the best. His father's hired servants have enough food to spare. If I could just work off the debt that I owe him, this is like offering a payment plan. He's actually proposing something, to use maybe a bigger word. He's offering restitution. He's thinking, make me like one of your hired servants. And something I uncovered this week is that I always thought that he meant like he would be on the property, but some think that in this culture, in this day and age, it actually would have been someone that would have lived maybe more in town or on another property and came onto the property to work. And so his idea is that I'm not even really worthy to live on the property anymore, but I am willing to work and serve you, and maybe that'll be a way that I can show my level of remorse and I can pay it back. That's restitution. But the problem here isn't with remorse. I think that's a healthy response. And really the problem isn't that he wants to make things right. I think that's a healthy, natural thing that humans should feel. But the problem is believing that we can. As in, the problem is believing that we could actually pay it back, or that this son in this case could actually make things right just by simply working things off. He believes he could pay it back, and he wants to earn his keep, is maybe a phrase some of us are used to. And I think it's natural because most of us today would probably have a similar, maybe a different application, but the same kind of thought process. The son came offering restitution, but the father responded with restoration. Even giving the signet ring, that's something where we're not used to that today, but imagine for this home, if anything needed to be signed off on, It wasn't just coming to the father's desk and he would sign, but anyone with that signet could actually stamp that, and it was like the family stamp of approval. And so this son is restored, and instantly. And so the end of Act 1 really is the father's response. And speaking of run, this is an unusual thing to happen, and being that it's Father's Day today, I thought I would put on a shirt that would look like the real JS. My grandfather would wear a shirt just like this, and so today I'm wearing this in honor of the real John Sherwood. I don't have many stories with my father. My earliest memories are with my grandparents, but I do have a story that was passed on to me, a positive one about my actual father that I can picture, even though, sometimes people, they say that, oh, my earliest memory is birth. Yeah, I can remember coming. No, you can't. Or someone might even say, yeah, my earliest memory, I'm 1 or 2. No, we know that that's not true. You have heard a story and now you've pictured that story, but I can picture this, so it's not my memory, but it's a memory that people have shared with me. And so even though he wasn't in the picture, this is one positive memory. And when I was really young, that was any time before today, right? When I was younger, my grandparents had this property at Scotch Lake. Have you ever been out that way past Mactaquac? I remember some of my earliest memories are out there, going to the lake. And at first, it was to either tent or have an old camper, and people would stay on the property. And then when I got a little older, yes, I helped. So I was probably like 3 or 4, and I was hammering nails, and they built a little camp there, and it was excellent. But somehow, when I was really little, I was with my parents, and my little leg got caught in the door. And worse still, the door was locked, and even just to rub things in, the keys were in the car. And just keep in mind, this was the 1980s. We didn't have fancy key fobs or apps where you could just unlock from entering a password or something like that. And so if you can just picture little John with curly kind of blonde hair, trapped and screaming, I was probably not in a good place at the moment. But my grandfather's cousin lived nearby somewhat in Scotch Settlement. And he worked as a mechanic. And so what I'm told is that my father, he just immediately took off running about 4 kilometers. He didn't stop. And when he got there, you can only imagine trying to explain and being out of breath. And imagine that surge of adrenaline and maybe panic and the instinct of a parent just trying to help their child who's in distress. He didn't really think about it. He just ran. And so he got there, and my grandfather's cousin Gene was able to drive him back, and he was probably catching his breath, and they were able to get me out. Here I am today, aren't you glad? But I can just picture him running, and for some of you that have run, a 5K, imagine even 4 in that on a dirt road. I'm sure that was really fun. But I think this is when a parent's instinct is to run towards a child in distress. In this case, the father, he didn't hear about the son returning. In this case, he actually saw him. Does it imply that he was waiting and he was watching and he was hoping? Maybe he even got word that there's a famine, and he's like, I hope that this helps him to come to his senses and come back. And we know kind of the behind the scenes. We even know what the son was thinking. And it says that while this son was returning, while he was still a long way off, his father ran to him. And this was unusual. They didn't dress like we dress today. And this would have looked awkward as he kind of picked things up and ran, and probably in sandals too. And so I'm sure that would have been fun, right? But here he does it, and this should be shocking to the audience that the father, first of all, it's unusual that he actually listened to the younger son to give the inheritance, which the oldest son, if there were just 2, the oldest son would have got 2/3. The younger son would have got 1/3. And so when he arranged this, that was already a surprise to the listeners. Now to hear him running and receiving this son back, really surprising. This father is far more patient than many of us would naturally be. He's compassionate. He's more loving than we would expect. And we're about to kind of change gears into the second half, the second act of the story. But if you think about the older brother, he's saying words like what we've already heard in the story, this son of yours. He can't even say that it's his brother. This is an issue. And there's another time in Luke where someone can't even utter the words of the other person. It's in the Good Samaritan, that parable where the man just says the one who showed mercy. He can't even say who it is. And this is one of those things where he's distancing and kind of dehumanizing the other person. And isn't that something that we often struggle with ourselves? Where the father says, this son of mine, the older brother has this air of, yeah, this son of yours. Because the older brother sees someone to reject, but the father, he sees someone to restore. And that's exactly what he does. You know, we use a phrase, and it's not a good one, but sometimes we use it jokingly because of pop culture. But there's this phrase, dead to me. Or if you've ever said it or heard someone say, they're dead to me. It describes a relationship that's been written off. A person we've decided they no longer deserve our love or our attention or our forgiveness. And this is essentially what the older brother, what he's doing. His attitude towards his younger brother is to separate. And it's not my brother anymore. It's just my father's other son. And so this is what he's saying. He's essentially disowning him. And as far as he's concerned, he's still dead. And so he's saying he's dead to me, but the father, this is so important to the story. He's not saying that he was only lost and then found. What did he say? He was dead. He's alive again. There's way more power. There's way more tension in the story because of this. He restores him. The son, he offers restitution, or at least he tries to, and the father cuts him off to tell the servants to bring all these things that represent the restoration. The father, he doesn't see him as just a project to fix, but he sees a son to restore with a robe and with a ring and with even sandals. Did he come home barefoot? That would be rough. I couldn't do it. And then there's this feast. And there's this kind of hidden detail that maybe we don't think about, but this is maybe something to unpack for those of you kind of studying this and looking for something deeper. The feast, how is this being paid for? Well, it's a fattened calf, but if you think of the context here, it's being paid for with the older brother's future inheritance. And so not only is there a celebration for someone who just squandered money, but all of a sudden the older brother is feeling like he's getting pinched a little bit too. But the truth is, grace is costly. This leads us to the full second act, that the older son, he's showing resentment. He's angry. He refuses to celebrate. He refuses to call his brother by that term, this son of yours. There's this refusal to go in and enter the feast and to share in the father's joy. To the father, this could be the greatest day of his life because his son is back and he's alive, he's well. And so for us, what would be our similar kind of concept of killing the fattened calf? Well, many of us, the biggest celebration that we would experience is a wedding of a family member or a son or daughter to put on a feast for, sometimes a few hundred people. That would be maybe the closest thing. For this, they wouldn't have been eating this just any old time. And so it was a big deal to take the thing that they've been waiting for, and not just for the property, but many have speculated that perhaps people in the nearing community would have come to celebrate this. They wouldn't have ate our standard of biggie size, large size, everything. And so this would have been able to feed hundreds of people. But there's this refusal. So the younger son, he was lost and far from home, but in this second act, we see that the older son, he's lost and he's so close to home. He's so close to being able to enter into this celebration, but his heart is not willing to accept this. And so it's really apparent in the story that one of them rebels quite openly, and it seems drastic what he would ask of the father. But the other one, he resents somewhat quietly until the end here, until he's starting to spew this out to his father. And so both sons are lost. But I think there's this deeper problem that starts to become more relevant to us, is that the younger son's plan was, yes, to earn his way back. He's like, I'm going to earn my way back. I'll come. I have this rehearsed, and he probably even means it. Father, just take me on as a hired servant, and I'll pay you back. But the older son's plan is, I've already earned my place. You haven't even given me a young goat to celebrate with my friends. Different strategies, but the same heart. It's kind of like two sides of the same coin. Both believe that acceptance is based on performance, and so I think both are misunderstanding grace. So hopefully we can understand it better today. When you finish Act 2, it should feel unresolved. I think that is master level teaching from the master himself. Something's missing because the first couple stories that he shares, we won't get into all of them, but in the first one there's a lost sheep, and then in the second one there's a lost coin, and so we're here expecting a search party because the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes and searches, and the woman, she overturns everything in the house to find this lost coin. No one comes searching for the son. The older brother stays home, and many have speculated that in that culture it was expected that he would have gone out. He would have went representing the father, representing the home and the property. He would have went to win his brother back. So I think that this story creates this longing, this tension for a better older brother. It's easy to look down on this older brother. There's not much bright there, at least at this moment. But again, it's not finished. It should leave us unsettled. But we know the rest of the story of the gospel is that Jesus, he is that older brother we're longing for. He's the one that left home. He's the one that went to seek for the lost. He actually paid the greatest cost to bring us home. There's this progression throughout the gospel narrative of restitution. Yeah, he's going to make restitution. Redemption, yeah, he's going to take care of that too. The restoration, it's only because of his work. And so we cannot make restitution. We cannot pay the Father back. Jesus accomplished redemption and restoration for us. That's what the Father offers. There's a preacher and author named Judah Smith. There's a quote that I think is just better than anything that I could say on this point, is that our sonship is not based on our performance, but on Jesus' finished performance and our faith in that finished work. Anytime that I have the opportunity to take part in the Lord's Supper in communion, or even when I'm worshiping and looking up at the cross, I try to be reminded that it's finished. We're reminded that he did that already for us. And so whatever we're rehearsing to come back, he's provided a way so that we don't have to make restitution for that. We can be restored to the Father because, and only because, of this true older brother, Jesus. So the younger son, he thought and expected, maybe for good reason, that he lost sonship because he essentially wished the father dead and left home. The older son, he thought he earned his place just through obedience, but both are actually wrong. The younger son, he couldn't restore what was lost, and the older brother wouldn't restore what was lost. He wouldn't have been involved in putting a robe on his younger brother, but Jesus, he restored what was lost, from restitution to redemption itself to restoration. And this kind of bonus thought maybe to leave us pondering today is the real test on whether we have understood the gospel is not just how we feel about how we've been forgiven, but how we feel when God extends forgiveness to someone else. How do we feel about that? That might be key in understanding if we truly get what the good news is all about. I think the important turning point in the story is when the son finally came to his senses. That's really the pivotal moment in verse 17. When he finally came to his senses, everything changed. That was the start of returning home. And the father, we know now, after hearing the story, he was ready to receive him with open arms. The younger son, he recognizes his condition and begins that journey home. But when we hear that second act and we are left feeling like it's unresolved, don't you wish that there was a third act? Don't you wish that things kind of ended a little brighter than it did? And so I thought, what if the third act began with the same exact words as the pivotal moment in verse 17, when he finally came to his senses? Thinking about the initial audience, we've got these Pharisees, these religious leaders, teachers of religious law, that they're half the audience that Jesus is teaching and trying to explain to here. And so they're supposed to hear this as truly older brothers in the situation. So what if what if they finally came to their senses? That would be a beautiful start to the third act. But Jesus ends the story with the father just standing out there pleading for this older son of his to come in and celebrate. Why? Because his brother was dead and is now alive. That's why it's a happy day. That's why they must celebrate. But why does Jesus leave it with that kind of tension, almost like a cliffhanger, a to be continued? It's because these religious leaders, the ones listening to him, they were the older brothers in the story. And so perhaps this is, again, a master lesson in teaching of leaving it with the audience of what are you going to do next? Not what is this guy going to do next, but you're that guy. Will they come in and celebrate? Will they share in the Father's joy? Will they celebrate grace? So the older brother's problem is that he thinks his brother hasn't earned the celebration. And it's true, he hasn't earned it. The reality is that neither brother understands grace. I think the younger brother, he thinks, again, he can pay his way back into the family, but unfortunately, the issue for the older brother is that he thinks he's earned his place in the family. So one is trying to work off failures, the other is trying to cash in on obedience. Different approaches, but the same problem. Both believe their relationship with the Father is based on performance. It's a lot like people today. Some think they can pay it back, and others think they can earn it. But sonship is achieved not through restitution. It's not earned through obedience. It's actually a gift received by grace. The younger brother needs to come home, and the older brother needs to come in. We wish that that's how it ended. The truth is, both need the same gospel. And so the question for us is, do we need to come to our senses about what the gospel truly means? The team's about to lead us in a final psalm, but here's the application for us to really bring it home today. Why do you think Jesus told these three stories? We know the beginning, that there were tax collectors and notorious sinners. They often came to listen to Jesus teach. Isn't that incredible? But on the other hand, the other audience is the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law. They complained that Jesus was associating with them, even eating with such sinful people. So why did he tell the stories that he told? Well, just a couple chapters later, we hear this important thing from the words of Jesus himself about himself. He says, "For the Son of Man," he often referred to himself as the Son of Man, "he came to seek and save those who are lost." So why would Jesus teach about a lost sheep? Well, he says that there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents. And why would Jesus talk about a lost coin? Well, there's joy in the presence of God's angels when someone's restored, when they repent and turn back. And at the very end, the last verse of the story, the Father is saying we had to celebrate. So if Jesus came to seek and save the lost, and the lost are then found, we must celebrate. But here's the final challenge for us, maybe the big idea to take away today. If you want to rejoice in the found, you need to grieve for the lost. If you want to rejoice in the found, you need to grieve for the lost. Each of these scenarios, there was someone grieving for what was lost. In the first, the shepherd rejoices when that sheep is found. He even left the 99 for that one. The woman No, the other coins probably weren't going to go missing, but they were worth a lot to her. And so she rejoices, even throws a party. The father, when the son is found, he was dead, he's now alive, they must celebrate. The major point here is that God rejoices when the lost are found. Will we? And so 3 things as we close. Either to come home or to come in or to go and seek. The invitation for the younger son, someone who has been far away, is to come home, see how the Father is waiting for you, waiting to receive you with open arms, all because of our true older brother. Or to come in if you're seeing yourself like the older brother in the story. You need to deal with that. There's an invitation from the Father still for you to come in and celebrate. And for any of us who have already come home or come in, the invitation would be to seek for those who are still lost, to seek so that the lost would be found, so that the dead would come back to life.